The more things change, the more they stay the same. This is going to be a clip regarding your friend and mine, yeah right, Donald Trump, and how he is basically pandering to the Ku Klux Klan and the David Duke group. Here's a couple of people back in 1991 who were David Duke supporters. And then we're going to show you the current quote-unquote Donald Trump supporters. And notice the similarity in the two groups of people.
I don't think Duke is a Marxist. He doesn't look like one. He doesn't act like one. He doesn't talk like one.
I think the working white class of people has been kind of forgotten about.
The minute you just say yes, you're going to vote for David Duke, oh, you're a racist. You know, that's not the fact.
You just listen to what he says, and it's common sense.
He is saying what all of us have been feeling for a long time.
1991, the former KKK leader and white supremacist David Duke ran as the Republican nominee for governor of Louisiana. He got more than 60% of the white vote. 60% of the white vote.
Now notice the last lady that was interviewed said that he was saying what a lot of people were feeling. Now notice Donald Trump is saying what quote unquote a lot of people are feeling, and this is the result. Whenever someone who disagrees with those thoughts expresses their opinion.
It wasn't enough to win, but it was enough to get him into the runoff. Now that now that David Duke, the same David Duke, has endorsed Donald Trump for president in 2016, Donald Trump supporters are now wrestling, or not, with whether it bothers them to be on the same side of this particular aisle with somebody like David Duke and the Klan.
Are you planning on voting for Mr. Trump?
Yes, I am.
Is there anything you can say today that might make you change your mind? And recently, in the news, there have been some white supremacist groups that have come out in support of him. David Duke, former headmaster of the KKK. Does it bother you?
We're the same age.
What'd you say?
We're the same age.
So
I grew up in the 60s. It doesn't matter to me at all. I'm for him totally.
Okay, but none of those other institutions.
And that was one of the guys that was probably interviewed back in 1991 that was for David Duke, so he ain't changed.
Joining us now is MSNBC national correspondent Joy Reid. Joy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
You've just flown in. Boy, are your arms tired.
That's very tired.
You just come from Arkansas, but you're in South Carolina before that?
That's right.
You are an experienced reporter, and you have reported all over the country. You've seen a lot of campaigns. Is this par for the course, and we're just not used to looking at it this closely, or is this southern iteration of the Trump campaign getting more scary as time goes on?
Yeah, it's par for the course, but it's the course that you talked about at the top of the show, 1968, right? Mm-hmm. When I watch those Trump rallies, you know, and you and I sort of had talked about this offline, I see the 1968 George Wallace rallies. And remember, that was the year that, as you said, Hubert Humphrey was going to be the nominee, you had Richard Nixon, but George Wallace essentially taught Richard Nixon and the Republican Party how to win across the South. He used the same flamboyance, the same communicating to the working class, blue-collar white voter, the Schlitz malt liquor voter, saying, I understand your grievances. He had sort of a sense of humor about it, but they also were quite menacing to black and Jewish protesters. Mm-hmm. And so the interesting thing that we see now is that Trump has sort of reinvigorated the George Wallace style. And David Duke, who one of his first brushes with the law was some chicanery around his fundraising for George Wallace in 1972, the innovation that David Duke is sort of credited with in white nationalism is marrying Klanism, right? Klanism, which is essentially anti-black, with Nazism, and dressing it all up in a suit and tie and taking off the hood and marrying anti-Jewish, you know, really Nazism with anti-black racism. And so now with a Jewish man at the running for the Democratic nomination very prominently, and with a woman running very prominently, and with Donald Trump really winking and nodding at this kind of hatred, really. It is really a throwback.
And there's the relationship of Donald Trump personally as an individual candidate to this stuff. It's happening at a couple different levels. Obviously, there's the issue of disavowing or not disavowing, whether he ever elaborates and explains why he's disavowing, whether he ever makes a case to white supremacist sympathizers that he wouldn't be their guy and that he doesn't agree with them. That's one level. The other level at which I'm interested in this happening is what's happening with these protesters, because we are seeing a concerted effort to disrupt almost every Donald Trump rally in some way or another. What do we know about that effort, and what do you see about the way he handles it and his crowds handle that?
Well, first of all, if you look at the video of Trump rallies, before he even comes on stage, there are typically announcements telling people how they ought to handle it if a protester erupts. And they say to sort of surround the person and start yelling Trump, 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 right? So they orchestrate the shouting down of protesters. There's also the physical interaction, really scary and menacing, in which protesters are manhandled and thrown out of the door.
He encourages that from the dais. He encourages that from the podium.
Which George Wallace did. George Wallace essentially said if a protester lies down in front of one of our vehicles, it'll be the last vehicle that they lay down in front of, and encourage the crowd from the dais to throw out black protesters. And that is why it is so throwback. Well, Donald Trump, he may not be as brilliant as he claims he is, but he's not stupid, right? He understands who he is attracting. He's going to now be competing in Louisiana, which you talked about gave David Duke nearly 60% of the white vote. Barack Obama got 14% of the white vote in 2008. It was the third worst performance among white voters. The only worst ones were Mississippi and Alabama. So this Friday, when Marco Rubio was supposed to be in Baton Rouge, they canceled their event. Donald Trump will be there in Louisiana, competing for what he knows it is. If you look at that map of the old slave states of the Union, that was the Democratic Party's old South stronghold that converted now to Republicanism, and it's now turned off by that party. And he is appealing to those voters, whether he's doing it deliberately or not. He's whistling at them, and they're hearing it.
Yeah, and it's working. It's working for him electorally, and the supposed blowback against it is something he doesn't feel at all.
At all.
Yeah. Joy Reid, thank you so much. That was actually the best interview segment I have had with anybody on this show in a very long time. You're so smart. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Joy Reid.
Now, I'm going to roll back to a section just to make sure that you didn't miss it. And you're going to see one of the protesters manhandled, and the first one, his was kind of gentle, but the second one and the third one, the second gentleman was spit upon, and I mean, he was spit upon multiple times. And the third one, he was taken to the ground and kicked and punched while he was on the ground. So bear with me for a second, and then I'm going to roll that back again. Now I'm going to show you one section where a protester is basically manhandled. Now this is a woman, and men are actually punching on her. It's pretty brief, so you have to please pay close attention. See, people are just manhandling this woman. And here's another section where they knocked the protester to the ground, and they were kicking him and punching him. Now there's a couple of other sections that I want to show. I think it's another one or two. Okay, here's a section where one of the protesters, and it's a white guy that gets escorted out, and his treatment was fairly gentle. If he's shoved a couple of times, but nothing really horrendous. Now in this section, this white guy gets in the protester's face and spits in his face twice, and is cursing at him. Now that should have started a major fight. And again, here's a section where they knocked a protester to the ground and basically started beating him. So nothing has changed basically as far as how people are treated at Donald Trump protests. The same way that they were treated, and even worse, back in '91, as far as David Duke's protests and rallies were concerned. So, like I said, nothing's changed. Racism at its best.